Not every hospital is a place of healing. In these terrifying nurse stories, routine shifts turn into nightmares, full of strange presences, voices from beyond, and apparitions no one can explain. Like the story you're about to hear, where a nurse at a retirement home witnesses something crawling like a living shadow, and soon realizes the new patient may have brought something far darker than anyone imagined. But before we begin, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss a single chilling tale, and drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from. The hallway in the back wing of that nursing home always had a strange smell, a mix of cheap disinfectant and something deeper, older, as if the walls had absorbed decades of sighs and secrets. I had worked there for 3 years, and yet, every time the night shift came around, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The other staff avoided that part of the building after sundown, and no one ever explained why, until the day Mr. Graves arrived. He came on a Wednesday, a frail man with almost translucent skin, as if he already had 1 foot in the grave. The paperwork said he was 78 years old, but his eyes, those dark, deep-set eyes, seemed much older. The admin staff didn't say much about him, just that he was a special case who needed extra care. But the whispers started even before his first night. One of the cleaners, Maria, swore she saw him crawling on the floor of his room, moving in a way that wasn't human. Arms and legs twisted, spine arched like an insect. Everyone laughed, of course, until more residents started reporting the same thing. That night, Francine and I were in the nurses' station when we heard the first noise, a wet dragging sound, as if something was being pulled across the floor. Francine looked at me, and I saw the fear in her eyes before she even spoke. "Beatrice, did you hear that?" We both knew where it was coming from. Room 12, Mr. Graves's room. I grabbed the flashlight and pretended to be braver than I felt. "Let's go check it out. It's probably just him trying to get out of bed." But when the light hit the floor of the room, my blood ran cold. There was a shadow there. Not like the absence of light. No, it was a dense thing that moved on its own, undulating like thick smoke, and in the center of it, Mr. Graves, lying in bed, completely still. Francine grabbed my arm tightly. "Is he sleeping?" I whispered, but I had barely finished the sentence when his eyes suddenly opened. White, completely white, no pupils, no life. And then he sat up in a movement that wasn't natural, as if something was pulling him up. "You shouldn't be here." His voice wasn't his own. It was hoarse, guttural, as if something was speaking through him. The shadow on the floor pulsed, growing, getting closer to our feet. Francine let out a scream and ran. I almost fell backward when Mr. Graves smiled, a wide smile full of teeth that seemed too sharp. I didn't think twice. I turned and ran after Francine, but the hallway seemed longer, and behind us the sound of something dragging, crawling, along with a rough, wet breathing. When I looked over my shoulder, I saw the shadow now stretched along the walls as if trying to reach us, and in the middle of it, the figure of Mr. Graves, moving on all fours, too fast. Francine screamed my name when a laugh echoed through the hallway, low, guttural, as if it came from all directions at once. I had never felt so much fear in my life. We only managed to lock ourselves in the nurses' station, panting, while outside, something scratched at the door. We stayed locked in the nurses' station all night, listening to that scratching at the door. It was an irregular sound, as if whatever, or whoever, was on the other side was enjoying our terror. Francine trembled beside me, holding a crucifix she didn't even remember having in her pocket. "This isn't normal, Beatrice. This isn't some confused old man." I knew she was right, but what could we do? Call the police and say that an old man was chasing us like an animal? No one would believe us. When the sun finally rose, the sound stopped. I opened the door slowly, expecting to find, I don't know, scratch marks, blood, some proof of what happened. But there was nothing, just the empty hallway, lit by the weak morning light. Mr. Graves's room was quiet, the door slightly ajar. Francine didn't want to go near, so I went alone. My heart was beating so hard I could almost hear it. I pushed the door, and there he was. Mr. Graves lying in bed as if nothing had happened. But no, something was wrong. His skin looked paler, almost gray, and his eyes, those white eyes, were now closed. But the worst was the smell. A sweet, rotten odor, like meat left in the sun for days. "Mr. Graves?" I called softly, not expecting an answer. And there wasn't one. He was cold to the touch, dead. But it didn't make sense. He had been examined the day before, was stable. Nothing justified such a sudden death. Francine came in behind me and let out a moan when she saw the body. "Beatrice, look at his hands." I looked. Mr. Graves's fingers were black as if they had been burned from the inside, and under the nails, something dark and sticky, almost like tar. Francine made the sign of the cross. "This isn't disease. This is a curse." The administration was notified, an ambulance came, but no one seemed that surprised, as if they had already expected that Mr. Graves wouldn't last long. When they took the body, I swear I saw something moving inside the sheet. A quick shadow fleeing under the fabric. And then outside, in the garden, 3 owls, perched on the fence, staring fixedly at us. Francine quit that same day. I should have done the same. But I stayed. To this day, I don't know why. Maybe because deep down I needed to know what had happened there. But some things are better left unknown. In the following days, the nursing home was strangely silent. The residents seemed more agitated at night, waking up screaming from nightmares no one could explain. And me. I started seeing things. Movements in the corner of my eye. Shadows that disappeared when I turned my head. But the worst came on Mr. Graves's last night there. I was alone in the nurse's station, organizing the medications, when the radio suddenly crackled. That high-pitched static of interference. And in the middle of the noise, a voice. "Beatrice." It was Mr. Graves. Impossible. He was already dead, already taken away. But the voice came again, closer now, as if it were in the room with me. When I turned, the reflection in the window made me freeze. There he was, Mr. Graves, standing behind me, smiling that smile full of sharp teeth. But when I turned for real, nothing, just emptiness. My heart felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. That's when I heard the footsteps, dragging, coming from the hallway, and with it that smell, rotten meat and something chemical like sulfur. I grabbed the flashlight with trembling hands and pointed it at the door. The shadow was back, but now it was bigger. It wasn't just a stain on the floor anymore. It was a tall, too-thin figure writhing like black smoke, and in the middle of it 2 white dots, Mr. Graves's eyes. "You should have left when you had the chance," the thing whispered, with overlapping voices, his and something much, much older. I ran. I didn't think, just ran. The hallway seemed to bend, the doors slamming shut behind me. The flashlight fell, and I was left in the dark, listening to that wet dragging sound getting closer and closer, until, bam! I tripped and fell. When I turned, the shadow was on top of me, cold as an open grave. That's when the lights came on. The security guard, old Joe, was there, looking at me as if I were crazy. "Beatrice? What the hell is going on here?" I stammered, looking around. Nothing. No shadow, no Mr. Graves, just me on the floor, sweating cold. But when Joe helped me up, I saw, in the mirror behind him, reflected, Mr. Graves's smile stretched too wide, on my own face. I left that place the same day. I never went back. But to this day, when I look in the mirror in the dark, sometimes I see something flicker in my eyes, and I know he's still with me. Because some things never let you go. Weird. What did you think of the story? What rating from 0 to 10 would you give it? Leave your opinion here in the comments. After seeing something crawling like a creature from hell inside a nursing home, it's hard to believe that the supernatural could in any way try to help someone. But that's exactly what happens in the story you're about to see, where a mysterious figure appears in moments of despair and saves lives. The smell of alcohol and the sound of shoes dragging down the empty hallway were the first signs that she was nearby. I worked at St. Anne's Hospital in Chicago on the night shift. From 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., the place had a different energy. The fluorescent lights hummed softly, the hallways were deserted, and it was as if time slowed down. But it wasn't just the silence that made those hours strange. It was her, Elizabeth. The first time I heard about her was from Carla, an older nurse who had been at the hospital for about 20 years. We were in the break room drinking that terrible coffee from the machine that always seemed to choke, when she said, "Have you seen the nurse on the 3rd floor?" I laughed, thought it was a joke. But the way she said it quietly, almost as if she was afraid someone might hear, made me swallow hard. Elizabeth worked here in the 60s. They say she died on a night shift but never really left. I ignored it. Of course I did. I've worked in hospitals long enough to know that tired staff make up stories to pass the time, until things started happening. Critically ill patients would suddenly improve overnight. IV bags that should have been empty were full. Machines that turned off by themselves would come back on without anyone touching them. And there was always a strange smell in the air. That old hospital alcohol scent from those glass bottles they don't use anymore. But the weirdest thing was the shoes. At 3 in the morning, when the hospital was quieter than a graveyard, you could hear it. A slow dragging of soles as if someone was tired after hours on duty. The first time I heard it, I ran out of the nurses' station to see who was there. Nothing. No shadow. Just the hallway lit by those flickering lights. That's when I met Miss Annie. She was one of the oldest cleaners in the hospital, a little old lady who seemed to know every secret of the place. When I mentioned the sounds, she just smiled, as if she already knew. "Ah, so you've met Elizabeth?" She told me the whole story. Elizabeth had been a dedicated nurse, the kind who stayed late to make sure every patient was okay. One night during a bad storm, she had an aneurysm and died right there in the 3rd floor hallway. They only found her body the next day. "But she never stopped working," Miss Annie said with a twinkle in her eyes. "Some souls have so much duty that not even death can stop them from fulfilling it." I still didn't believe it, until the night I saw her. It was a new patient, an elderly man with severe pneumonia. His condition was worsening fast, and the doctors had already warned that his chances were slim. That night I was checking his vital signs when I felt a chill on the back of my neck. That alcohol scent filled the air. And then, in the reflection of the window glass, I saw her, a woman in an old white uniform, the kind with a skirt down to the ankles, adjusting the patient's IV. She didn't even look at me. She just did what she had to do, with a precision that seemed professional. When I turned around, there was no one there. But the IV bag, which had been almost empty, was full, and the patient who had been struggling to breathe was sleeping peacefully, as if someone had eased his pain. The next day, the doctors couldn't believe it when they saw the test results. "This isn't possible," one of them murmured. But I knew. Elizabeth had come to help. After that, I started paying more attention. Other staff members had stories too. A nursing technician swore he saw a nurse disappear down the hallway after helping a patient. A resident doctor said she felt an icy hand on her shoulder when she almost made a dosage mistake. And always, that alcohol scent and the sound of dragging footsteps. The hospital tried to put an end to the rumors, of course. They called a meeting, said it was nonsense, that tired staff saw things. But then, in the middle of the meeting, a stack of medical records fell off the table by itself. And when the supervisor went to pick them up, they were in perfect alphabetical order. No one talked about stopping the stories after that. Elizabeth became part of the team. Not officially, of course, but everyone knew. If you worked nights at St. Anne's, sooner or later you'd feel her nearby. And contrary to what you might think, it wasn't scary. It was comforting. Because in the end, she was there for a reason. She was a nurse, and nurses don't abandon their patients. The scariest thing wasn't that Elizabeth appeared. It was when she didn't. After that first time I saw her, I started noticing other details. Things that went unnoticed if you didn't know what to look for. The smell of alcohol grew stronger near the patients who were worsening. The sound of the shoes always came before some crisis. And sometimes I swore I saw white figures out of the corner of my eye, disappearing as soon as I turned my head. But it was on a stormy night that everything became real. The hospital was full, packed because of an accident on the highway. Screaming, running, blood on the floor, total chaos. I was in the middle of it all, trying to help where I could, when the manager called me. "We need you in room 307, now." It was a young man, a victim of the accident. He had been stable until shortly before, but suddenly his vital signs crashed. The doctor was already giving up when I entered. And then I felt it. The air grew cold. That alcohol scent filled the room, so strong you could almost see it in the air. And then, silence. No beeping machines, no murmurs. Even the storm outside seemed to stop. That's when I heard it. A whisper. I couldn't make out the words, but it was a female voice, calm, professional. And then, as if someone had pulled an invisible string, the machines returned to normal. The patient took a deep breath as if he had been pulled back from some dark place. The doctor looked at me, confused. "What did you do?" I didn't do anything, but when I looked at the corner of the room for a second, just a second, I saw her. Elizabeth. This time she wasn't a shadow. This time she looked straight at me and smiled. It wasn't a scary smile, no. It was gratitude, as if I had helped her without even knowing how. Then she disappeared, and the alcohol scent went away with her. After that night, things changed. The older staff started treating me differently. Miss Annie pulled me aside one day and said quietly, "She chose you. Not everyone gets to see her." I didn't know if that was a compliment or a warning, but then came the renovation. The hospital decided to modernize everything. New paint, new equipment, even the uniforms changed. And in the middle of the chaos, something strange happened. Elizabeth disappeared. No alcohol scent, no footsteps in the hallways, no patients suddenly improving. And the worst, the mistakes started happening. Wrong dosages, power outages, patients worsening without explanation. It was as if without her, the hospital had lost something essential. Until on a quiet night, I decided to do something. I took one of those old alcohol bottles, the glass ones that no one used anymore, and left it on the nurse's station counter, near the old photo of the 60s team that was still hanging on the wall. I didn't know what I expected. Maybe just to say thank you. And then, around 3 in the morning, I heard it. Dragging shoes. Slow, tired, familiar. When I looked, the bottle was empty. And in the hallway, for a fraction of a second, I saw a figure in white turn the corner. This time, she didn't disappear alone. This time, she waved. And since that night, the alcohol scent returned. So did the footsteps. And the patients? Well, no one dies on the night shift at St. Anne's. Not when Elizabeth is on duty. Creepy, huh? Not every spiritual presence comes to do harm, but not every hospital is this lucky. The next story shows a place where the reports are so many that the staff themselves avoid certain hallways, especially when they are alone. I was finishing up recording the vital signs for bed 12 in the ICU when I heard the call. A sharp, insistent beep coming from the monitor of patient 42. The problem? Bed 42 was empty. It had been empty since dawn when old Mr. Harris, a frail-hearted elderly man, had passed away quietly without even giving his family time to arrive. I knew this because I was the one who covered his face with the sheet. But there was the monitor, blinking as if someone were lying in that bed, the heart rate accelerating and decelerating in an impossible rhythm. My blood ran cold. I looked around expecting to see someone playing a prank on me, but the ICU corridor was deserted, only the dim light of the emergency lamps casting everything in a dull red. "Did anyone mess with this?" I shouted to Karen, the nurse at the nearest station. She didn't even need to look. She shook her head with a weariness that only those who have worked at Greenfield Memorial for years know. "It's always like this on the first night." "What do you mean, always like this?" She sighed, as if I were making her repeat a boring story. "Everyone who starts the night shift here goes through this. Mr. Harris likes to show up. Last year, Mary swore she saw him sitting on the bed, even though his body was already in the morgue." I laughed, but it was a dry, nervous laugh. Because look, I wasn't one to believe in such things. I had worked in hospitals for almost 10 years, had seen death, despair, people dying in ways no one should see. But ghosts? Never. Until that moment. I went to the monitor and turned it off by force. The beep stopped, but the silence that followed was worse. It was the kind of quiet that weighs heavily, as if the air had become denser. And then I felt it. That cold. The cold that runs down your spine and settles in your chest, as if someone had stuck an icy hand inside your ribs. I looked at bed 42, and the chair beside the bed, that hard plastic chair that every ICU has, was slightly rocking, as if someone had just gotten up. Karen. My voice came out in a whisper. She looked at me, then at the chair. Her face changed. She was no longer the hardened professional. She was just a scared woman. We should go. We did. But it didn't help. Because from that night on, I started seeing things. Things that shouldn't have been there. Figures in the corridors, always in white, always disappearing around the corner. Shadows that crept along the edges, as if they were crawling on the floor. And the noises. God, the noises. Footsteps behind me when the corridor was empty. Whispers coming from the closed waiting rooms. The worst was the wheelchair. I was with Karen and Rachel, going to get medication from the supply room, when the old wheelchair in corridor 3B, the one no one used because the tire was flat, simply moved. It wasn't a slow roll, no. It was a sudden jerk, as if someone had given it a hard push. It crossed the entire corridor and hit the wall with a bang that echoed like a gunshot. We three stood paralyzed. "It's Gregory," Rachel said, in a tone as natural as if she were commenting on the weather. "Who?" I asked, my voice still trembling. "A patient who died here in the 80s. They say he gets angry when someone messes with his things." I looked at the wheelchair, now quiet in the corner, and felt a knot in my stomach. Because I knew at that moment that Greenfield Memorial was not just a hospital. It was something much, much worse. After that night with the wheelchair, I started paying attention to the details, to the stories the older nurses told in the corners, to the looks exchanged when something strange happened, and especially to Corridor 3B. Because there, according to Rachel, was where Gregory stayed. I didn't want to believe it, but one thing was hearing about it, another was feeling it, and I felt it. Every time I passed that corridor, the air became heavier, as if someone were holding my breath for me. The lights flickered, even after maintenance checked the wiring. And once I swear I saw the supply room door opening by itself, slowly, as if someone were calling me. It was Karen who told me the full story. Gregory was a big guy, the kind who barely fit on a stretcher, she said, taking a sip of coffee while we waited for the shift to end. In the 80s, he was hospitalized here after a work accident, broke his back, spent months in that wheelchair, waiting for a surgery that never came. "And what happened to him?" I asked, already knowing the answer. She looked at me, and I saw on her face that this story had no happy ending. He died, suffocated. They say someone forgot to check his oxygen tank. When they found him, he was already cold. I felt a chill, because now it made sense. The wheelchair moving by itself, the noises, the anger. But nothing prepared me for what happened that night. I was alone at the nurse's station filling out reports when I heard a dragging of feet in the corridor. Slow, heavy, as if someone were leaning on the walls to walk. My heart raced. I stood up slowly, looking in the direction of the sound. And then I saw it. At the end of the corridor, a tall, hunched figure, leaning against the wall. The silhouette was dark, but I could see the outlines of a thin, almost skeletal body. And when he turned to me, I heard it. A low, hoarse moan, as if he were trying to speak. "Gregory." The name left my mouth before I could think. The thing stopped, and then in the blink of an eye, it disappeared. But the smell remained, that sweet and sour odor of rotting flesh. I ran to the staff room where Karen and Richard were playing cards. They looked at me and I didn't need to say anything. "It was in 3B, wasn't it?" Richard asked, putting the cards on the table. I just nodded, still breathless. It's him. It's always him. And that's when I understood. At Greenfield Memorial, the dead don't go away. They just wait for us to arrive. After that night, I couldn't ignore it anymore. Greenfield Memorial was alive in a way that had nothing to do with patients breathing or machines beeping. It was something older, more wrong. And the worst? I knew Gregory wasn't the only one. The other nurses' reports confirmed it. There was the girl from room 217 who always asked for water even after she was dead. Dr. Fisher, who still made night rounds decades after having a heart attack on the fire escape. And Mr. Harris, of course, always occupying his empty bed in the ICU, as if he were still waiting for a visit that never came. But nothing prepared me for what happened on my last night there. I was covering Rachel's shift when the call system beeped. It was room 307. The problem? Room 307 was under renovation, closed for weeks. Still, the little light wouldn't stop blinking. "I'll go take a look," I said to Karen, trying to sound braver than I felt. The corridor to room 307 was dark, only that emergency light giving a bloody hue to everything. And when I got close, the door was ajar. Click. The sound came from inside the room. Click, click, like nails tapping on metal. I pushed the door, and the smell hit me first. That hospital odor, yes, but mixed with something rotten like meat left in the sun. And then I saw it. Sitting on the bed with his back to me was a man. He wore a hospital gown, but I could see his skin, or what was left of it, gray and full of dark spots. Click, click. It was the sound of his fingers tapping on the bed. "Need help?" My voice came out trembling. The man stopped, and then slowly began to turn. I didn't wait to see his face. I ran, but the corridor seemed endless. The doors repeated themselves like in a nightmare. And behind me I heard footsteps, fast. It was only when I ran into the security guard, almost knocking him over, that the corridor returned to normal. "Are you okay?" he asked, holding my arm. I looked back. Nothing. Just the empty and silent corridor. Everything's fine. But it wasn't. The next day, I quit. Now, when I pass by Greenfield Memorial, I still look at the upper windows. And sometimes, just sometimes, I swear I see figures looking back, because some places don't let you go. Not completely. How scary. Constant hauntings are frightening enough on their own, but what happens when one of them speaks to you and hands you something? That's what happens to an employee during the night shift, in an encounter that starts as routine and ends in chills. But before we continue with the story, if you've made it this far, it means you're enjoying our stories. So go ahead and leave a like to let YouTube know you enjoy this type of content and don't want to miss any more horror stories. That nursing home had a smell that clung to your skin. Cheap disinfectant, lukewarm soup, and something else. Something you couldn't quite name. I arrived in the US in 2003 with a suitcase full of hopes, and no idea that my first job would be in a place where the patients' groans echoed like souls trapped between peeling walls. When I enrolled in that nursing assistant course, I thought it would just be changing diapers and giving baths to smiling old folks. No one told me the internship would be in a tiny nursing home where the sounds weren't human. They were like cows in agony in the middle of the night. The first time I stepped in there, my instincts screamed at me to run. The hallways were narrow, lit by flickering lights like winks from someone about to die. And the patients. God, the patients. Some just sat there, staring into nothingness, as if they saw things we couldn't. Others screamed for no reason, and the assistants didn't even lift their heads. It was hell, but with the smell of talcum powder and mashed potatoes. But I needed the job, and when they hired me after the recommendations, "She's quick, not afraid of dirty work," I accepted right away. Night shift from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. "You'll see different things," the head nurse warned me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She wasn't kidding. Fourth shift. I was getting used to the routine, checking on patients, changing the wet ones, giving out medications, until at 2 a.m. Mary decided to pass. It wasn't dramatic or anything, she just stopped. A frail old lady, her white hair as thin as spider webs, lying in that hospital bed that seemed to swallow her alive. When I saw the flat line on the monitor, my stomach twisted into a knot. I called Edith, a nursing assistant who had worked there for years. She walked into the room, looked at Mary, and sighed. "Let's prepare her." Prepare. Such a nice word for something so macabre. We took off her clothes, cleaned her still warm body, wrapped her in clean sheets. That's when Edith asked me to go to the storage room to get a body bag. The storage room was at the end of the hallway, where the light was dimmer. The door creaked when I opened it, and the air inside was cold. Not the normal cold of air conditioning, but the kind that seems to come from within your bones. It was dark, so I fumbled along the shelves looking for the bags. That's when I heard a noise behind me. I turned quickly, and there she was, a little old lady, thin in a purple dress and a white cloth tied around her head, the kind of cloth they use to hold thin hair. She stood there looking at me with eyes that seemed too big for her face. "Looking for the bags, dear?" Her voice was thin, almost a whistle. I froze. She wasn't a patient. I knew all the faces in the ward, and no one on the staff wore those old, worn-out clothes. But the strangest thing? She reached out and pointed to a high shelf. "It's there, in the corner." Without thinking, I grabbed the bag. When I looked again, she was gone. I ran back to Mary's room, my hands shaking. Edith looked at me and then at the bag. "You're as white as a sheet, girl. What happened?" There was a lady in the storage room. She helped me find the bags. Edith stopped what she was doing and stared at me. "Describe her." When I mentioned the purple dress and the cloth on her head, Edith's eyes welled up. "Esther." "Esther who?" She took a deep breath. "Esther worked here. She was a nursing assistant, like us. Died about 10 years ago, from cancer. I took care of her in her last days. My heart was beating so hard I thought it would come out of my mouth. So, I saw a ghost?" Edith gave a sad smile. "She appears sometimes, especially when someone is about to pass. I think she comes to help." I looked at Mary, quiet on the bed, and then at the empty hallway. The air was still cold. Edith took the bag from my hands and started preparing the body as if nothing was out of the ordinary. "You don't need to be afraid. Esther never hurt anyone." But I couldn't stop thinking about those eyes, and the fact that now I knew the nursing home didn't belong only to the living. From that day on, the nursing home was never the same for me. I tried to convince myself that Esther was just a memory, a harmless ghost like Edith said. But every time I passed by the storage room, I felt that cold that came from nowhere. And the patients, they knew. Some whispered to her in the middle of the night, as if talking to someone only they could see. 2 weeks after Mary's death, the nursing home became strangely quiet. Even the usual screams had ceased. Edith was on leave, and I was alone in the hallway, making my rounds, when I heard a noise coming from room 23, the same one where Mary had died. The door was ajar, and inside a faint light flickered, as if someone had lit a candle. My pulse quickened, but I took a deep breath. Must be a confused patient. I pushed the door slowly and looked inside. The room was empty, the bed made. No one had been placed there yet, but in the middle of the floor, right in the center, there was a white cloth tied up, just like the one Esther used to wear on her head. And it was moving, not with the wind, because there was no wind. It was as if something invisible was pulling it, dragging it slowly toward the bed. I couldn't breathe. My whole body screamed at me to get out of there, but my feet seemed glued to the floor. That's when I heard a whisper behind me, so close I felt the cold air on my neck. "She's coming." I jumped and turned around, but there was no one there, just the dark and endless hallway. I ran to the nurse's room, almost tripping along the way. The only person there was the security guard, a big guy named Dave, who was dozing in a chair. "Dave, there's something in room 23. He got up slowly, rubbing his eyes. "What, rats again?" "No, there's something there. Someone." He sighed, as if I were just another rookie nursing assistant scared of shadows. But when we went back to the room, the door was closed and locked. Dave tried the doorknob, then gave it a push. Locked from the inside. That doesn't make sense. We called the janitor to open it, and when the door finally gave way, the room was exactly as before, empty. Only now, the white cloth was no longer on the floor. It was on the bed, perfectly folded, as if someone had placed it there on purpose. Dave turned pale. What the hell? That night I couldn't finish my shift. I made up a headache and went home early. But it didn't help, because when I closed my eyes, I still saw Esther in front of me. Only now she wasn't alone. Beside her, hand in hand, was Mary, and they were both smiling. The next day, Edith pulled me aside at breakfast. I heard what happened. You saw her again, didn't you? I nodded, unable to speak. Edith looked around as if afraid someone might hear and then whispered, Esther appears when someone is going to die. But there's something I never told you. She only comes for those who deserve to rest. I didn't understand. What does that mean? She squeezed my arm, and for the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. There are patients here who don't go away, who get stuck. And Esther, she tries to help. But there are things in this nursing home that even she can't control. That night, I returned to my shift with a heavy heart. The hallway seemed darker, the groans more anguished. And when I passed by room 23, I swore I heard soft laughter inside. But the worst part? This time, the door was open, and someone had left a lit candle on the floor. How horrifying. What did you think of the story? What rating from 0 to 10 would you give it? Leave your opinion here in the comments. I was alone in the nursing home parking lot that night when I first felt that something was wrong with my car. It wasn't just the strange noise coming from the engine. It was something more. As if the air around me had grown heavier, as if someone was there, watching. But when I looked in the rearview mirror, there was no one. Just the emptiness of the poorly lit parking lot, and that silence that always seems denser after midnight. I worked as a nursing assistant in the long-term care unit of that nursing home, taking care of elderly people who, most of the time, had no one else. But Mr. Callahan was different. He was only 58 years old when he had a stroke while changing the oil in his daughter's car. A strong man used to fixing things, trapped in a body that no longer responded. He came to us paralyzed, fed by a tube, unable to speak. But his eyes, his eyes were still alive. He understood everything. And his daughter, Carol, came almost every day, held his hand and shared the news. You could see how much he loved that woman. I took care of him directly, bathing, feeding, changing his position. You create a bond, you know? Even when the patient doesn't speak. And I swear, sometimes I felt like he was trying to communicate. A longer blink, a sigh that seemed intentional. But after a year, a blood infection took him. It was quick. One night he was there, the next day, he was gone. Carol was devastated. She always said that her father had promised to take care of her car, that he loved that old Mustang. He always said cars have souls, you know, she told me once, laughing through her tears. I had never thought about that, until that night in the parking lot. I had just finished my shift and was on my way to see my boyfriend when the car started acting up. A knocking sound, like the spark plugs were bad. I don't know anything about mechanics, so I just prayed to make it to his house. That's when I stopped at a red light and felt a hand, not a real hand, not something I could see, but a pressure on my shoulder, as if someone had touched me. My heart raced. I looked at the passenger seat, empty. I looked at the back seat, nothing. And then, the hood of the car just opened by itself. I almost had a heart attack. The light turned green and the cars behind me started honking, but I was frozen. How the hell did the hood open by itself? I got out, my hands shaking, and as I approached, it closed, with a loud thud. By itself. There was no wind. There was no one around. I looked around, expecting to see someone playing a prank on me, but the parking lot was deserted. My phone rang, and I jumped. It was my boyfriend, asking where I was. I swallowed hard and said I had a problem with the car. It's probably the spark plugs, he said. When I finally got home, I was exhausted. I fell into bed and instantly fell asleep. That's when I dreamed about Mr. Callahan. He was standing, without the wheelchair, without the feeding tube, smiling, and he handed me a key. "You need to change the spark plugs," he said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Carol's Mustang always had problems when the spark plugs were bad. Look in the glove compartment. I woke up with a start. It was still the middle of the night, and I knew, with a certainty that came from somewhere beyond reason, that it hadn't just been a dream. The next day, I told my boyfriend. He frowned, skeptical, but when he looked in the glove compartment, guess what? There was a new set of spark plugs there, still in the package. He changed the spark plugs and the car stopped making noise. It worked perfectly. But I couldn't stop thinking about that sensation on my shoulder, the hood that opened and closed by itself, and Mr. Callahan's smile in my dream. Something told me that wouldn't be the last time I felt him nearby. After that night with the car, I started noticing strange things at the nursing home. Small details that alone could be coincidences, but together formed a pattern. The lights in Mr. Callahan's unit flickered for no reason. Sometimes I heard the sound of tools clanging, as if someone were working on an engine, even though I knew there were no mechanics around. And the smell. A faint aroma of car oil that came out of nowhere and quickly disappeared. Carol still visited the nursing home, even after her father's death. She came to see an elderly woman who had been a friend of his. One night she pulled me aside, her eyes filled with tears. "I dreamed about my dad," she confessed. "He was smiling with his hands dirty with grease, as always. He said he fixed your car, and now he's going to take care of mine." I felt a chill. How did she know about my car? I had never told her. That same week, one of the night nurses came to me, as white as a sheet. "Do you believe in ghosts?" she asked, before telling me she had seen a tall man in blue overalls standing in the empty hallway. When she approached, he disappeared. I knew exactly who it was, but the scariest thing happened on Carol's birthday. She brought a cake to celebrate with the other residents, and I swear when she blew out the candles, all the lights in the nursing home flickered once, strongly, like a sign. That night, my car broke down again. This time I was on my way home after the overnight shift. The engine died in the middle of a deserted road, and when I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw a figure behind the glass. A dark silhouette with broad shoulders, like Mr. Callahan. My heart almost jumped out of my mouth. I took a deep breath and turned around, ready to scream. But there was no one there. That's when the radio turned on by itself. Static, for a second, until a voice whispered softly, as if coming from far away. "Thank you for taking care of my girl." The engine started again by itself. I never doubted spirits after that. Mr. Callahan is still around, taking care of what he loves. And now every time a light flickers for no reason or when I smell that oil in the air, I just smile. Because some souls never really leave, and that's not scary, it's comforting. If you've made it this far, you already know these stories aren't just spine-tingling, they're deeply human too. If you love these kinds of accounts, hit subscribe to keep up with experiences most people are too afraid to share. And let me know in the comments if you made it to the end by typing, "Nurses get scared too." That way, I'll know who really stuck with me till the very last breath. Oh, and leave a like. Not just because it helps the channel, but because after everything we've been through together in this video, I'd say we've got a connection now, right? There's another video right over here that keeps the same eerie vibe going. Click it and join me for another story.